The wind was inside the cabin, not outside, inside. It moved through the walls, through the cracks, through the spaces no one could see. You couldn't always hear it, but you could feel it. On your neck, in your sleeves, in your lungs. Elias Varg stood in the dark that night, watching the candle flame bend sideways, though every door was shut. That was when he knew. The cold was not the enemy. The air was. The first winter had already taken something from them. Not a life. Not yet. But it came close. It was a night like any other on the upper Michigan frontier, the kind where the cold didn't arrive all at once, but settled in slowly until it was everywhere. Inside the cabin, the fire burned hard. Too hard. Logs cracked in the hearth, sparks climbed the chimney. And still, the air stayed cold. Marta sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping another layer around their daughter. "Her hands are still cold," she whispered. Elias didn't answer. He was watching the smoke, not the smoke in the chimney, the smoke that never quite left the room. It curled low along the ceiling, then drifted sideways, then vanished through the wall, as if the cabin itself were breathing. Wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Later that night, Ingrid stopped moving. It was Marta who noticed first. "She's not waking," she said. Not panic. Not yet. Just something quieter. Something worse. Elias crossed the room in 2 steps, touched the girl's face. Cold. Too cold. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. The fire roared behind him, throwing heat into the room, but none of it seemed to reach her. Because it wasn't staying. Elias lifted her, brought her closer to the fire, turned her toward the heat, and watched her breath fog weakly in the air. That was the moment. Not when the cold touched her, but when the warmth couldn't reach her. He looked up, at the walls, at the seams between the logs, at the places where darkness moved, even when nothing else did. The wind was not outside. It was passing through them, carrying the heat away as fast as they could make it. They stayed awake the rest of the night, feeding the fire, turning the child, listening to her breathe. By morning, she woke. Barely, but enough. Marta held her close, eyes red from the dark. Elias stepped outside. The wind hit him like a blade, but this time it made sense. Out here, it belonged. Inside, it did not. He turned back toward the cabin, looked at it the way a craftsman looks at a failed piece of work. Not with anger, with understanding. Every gap, every seam, every joint that wasn't perfect. All of it, inviting the wind inside. He had not built a shelter. He had built a machine that pulled the cold through his family again and again without ever stopping. That afternoon, he didn't repair the walls. He didn't add more mud, didn't stuff more cloth into the cracks. He didn't make the fire bigger. Instead, he walked past the cabin, past the clearing, into the trees beyond. That was where he found it, a massive pine, struck down by lightning in the summer storm. Its trunk split open along one side, dark and hollow at the core. The others had seen it before. They had marked it as useless, too large to mill, too damaged to build with, left to rot. Elias stepped closer, ran his hand along the inside of the split, smooth, curved, deep, protected, still. The air inside the hollow did not move, not even when the wind screamed through the trees around it. Elias stood there for a long time, listening, feeling, understanding something the others had missed. You could not stop the wind. You could not fight it. You could not outburn it. But you could build a place where it could not enter. When he returned to the cabin, Marta saw it in his face. Not hope, something quieter, something certain. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Elias looked past her, at the fire, at the shifting air above it, at the way the warmth twisted and vanished before it reached the walls. Then he said, "I am not building another house. I am building a place where the air cannot move." 3 days later, he picked up his tools and began cutting into the heart of the fallen pine. Not to make boards, not to shape beams, but to carve out a space where the wind would never find them again. The first sound carried farther than he expected. Steel biting into old pine, a dull, hollow thud that echoed through the trees. Not the clean cut of a saw. Something slower, something deliberate. Elias did not start by cutting it down. The tree had already fallen. What he needed was inside it. He marked 2 lines along the length of the trunk, parallel, careful, wide enough for a man to lie down inside, narrow enough to keep the walls thick. Then he set the saw. The teeth caught, dragged, then found rhythm. Back and forth, back and forth. The sound repeated hour after hour until it became part of the forest itself. By the second day, others had noticed. A wagon slowed on the ridge above. 2 men stood watching. "What's he doing?" one asked. The other didn't answer. He didn't need to. It didn't make sense. By the 3rd day, they came closer, boots crunching over frost, stopping just far enough to watch without helping. "He's gutting the tree," one of them said. "For what?" A pause, then laughter. Elias kept working. It took nearly a week to free the slab, a massive section of bark and outer wood, pried loose with wedges and leverage, inch by inch. When it finally gave, it didn't fall. It shifted, then settled beside the trunk, revealing the dark hollow beneath. The interior was rough, burned in places, split in others. But it was there, a space already begun. Marta stood at the edge of the clearing, arms folded tight against the cold. "You're going to live in that?" she asked. Not disbelief, something closer to fear. Elias stepped inside the hollow. The wind outside dropped away, not gone, but softened, as if the tree itself held it back. He turned slowly, ran his hand along the inner curve. Solid, thick, a foot and more of wood between him and the world outside. "Yes," he said. Marta looked at the old cabin behind them, smoke leaking from places it shouldn't, the walls whispering even in daylight. She didn't argue, but she didn't look convinced. The real work began after that, not cutting, shaping. Elias climbed inside the log with his tools, an auger first, driving it deep into the heartwood, twisting, pulling free thick spirals of damp, resin-heavy pine. Hole after hole, each one weakening the core, preparing it. Then the adze, a curved blade made for carving, not chopping. He stood inside the trunk and began to strike downward. Short, controlled swings, following the grain, never fighting it. Chunks broke free, heavy, wet, falling at his feet, then dragged out into the growing pile beyond the opening. Oscar climbed that pile by afternoon. Ingrid followed. They laughed, played on the mountain of wood that had once been solid. Elias heard them, but did not look up. The work demanded attention. Every strike mattered. Too deep, and the wall thinned. Too shallow, and the space stayed tight. He measured without measuring, by feel, by sound, by resistance in the wood itself. Days passed. The hollow deepened, lengthened, became something more than a split trunk. From the outside, it still looked like foolishness. A man digging into a fallen tree, a family abandoning a standing cabin for something buried in the ground. The wagons kept coming, and stopping, and watching. "Going to rot from the inside out," one man said. "Damp'll take it before the cold does." Another spat into the frost. "Man's building himself a coffin." Elias said nothing. He stepped out of the log only when the light was gone. Hands numb, back tight, clothes stiff with resin and sweat. At night, he sat inside the hollow with Marta and the children. No fire, just the dark. They listened to the wind moving through the trees above them, through the old cabin behind them. But inside the trunk, it did not reach them. It was faint, almost nothing, but it was there. The absence. Marta noticed it first. "It's quieter," she said. Elias nodded. That was enough. By late autumn, the hollow had become a space. Long, curved, just wide enough for 4 people to live. But it was not finished. Not yet. Elias stood at one end, studying the opening, the place where air would enter, where everything could fail. A shelter is not defined by its walls, but by its edges. That was where the wind would try to return, where it would find its way back in if given even the smallest path. Elias picked up his tools again, not to remove more wood, but to begin the work that mattered most, sealing the space, making it whole. Because carving the hollow had only created the possibility of warmth. What came next would decide if it could ever stay. The hollow was not enough. A space without walls is still open, and anything open invites the wind back in. Elias stood at the cut end of the trunk, studying the shape. It wasn't clean, not a perfect circle, not even close. The lightning had split it unevenly, left edges that curved and dipped, changed with every inch. A flat board would never seal it, not tight enough, not against the wind. So he went back into the forest, not looking for straight trees, looking for crooked ones. Trees that bent where others had grown true. Trees most men would leave standing because they were useless for building. Elias saw something else. He saw pieces that could match the curve. It took him 2 days to find the first one, a pine with a natural sweep through its trunk. He cut it down, dragged it back, and set it against the opening. From the outside, it looked wrong, too large, too uneven. From the inside, it almost fit. Almost was not enough. Elias took out his scriber, a simple tool, 2 steel points fixed at a set distance. One touched the hollow log. The other scratched the shape onto the new piece. He moved slowly, tracing every rise, every dip, every imperfection. Then he set the scriber aside, picked up the axe, and began cutting to the line. Not past it, never past it, shaving thin curls of wood away until the edge began to match. He lifted the piece again, set it into place. It caught. Not yet. Still gaps. He pulled it back out, marked again, cut again. Hours passed like that. Fit, remove, carve, return. Each time the gaps grew smaller, until finally the logs slid into place and stopped. No wobble, no shift, just weight and contact. Elias pressed his palm against the seam, ran his fingers along the edge. No air. He stepped back, and for the first time since the work began, allowed himself a breath that wasn't tight with effort. The second end took longer, harder angles, more variation, more chances to fail. Marta helped this time, holding the piece steady, watching his marks, saying nothing, but staying. By the time both ends were sealed, the hollow log was no longer open. It was a space, closed, contained, but still not safe, because the ground itself was another path. That night, a storm rolled through early. Not the deep winter storm, but a warning. Rain turned to ice before it reached the ground. Wind pushed it sideways. Elias and Marta stood inside the old cabin, listening. The walls whispered again. The fire pulled air through every crack. The same pattern, the same failure. Then Elias stepped outside, to the log, knelt, pressed his hand against the earth beneath it. Cold, wet, alive with movement. If the log sat directly on that, the damp would rise. The cold would follow, not through air, but through contact. Another path, another loss. The next morning, he gathered stones, flat ones, heavy, carried them one by one, setting them into the ground, building a base. Not high, just enough. Enough to lift the log away from the earth. It took the better part of 2 days. When it was done, he and Marta rolled the trunk onto the stones. It settled with a deep, final weight. Then came the packing. Clay, moss, dirt, stuffed beneath the log, pressed into every gap, sealing it from below, cutting off the last path. Finally, he turned to the top. The slab he had removed in the beginning now waited beside the trench. He lined the edge with dried moss, thick, dense. Then slowly, carefully, they lowered the slab back into place. It met the edges with a dull, heavy sound. Not perfect, but close. Elias pressed down along the seam, adjusted, shifted, until the gaps were gone. From the outside, the structure began to disappear. Earth was pulled up along the sides, packed tight, higher, then higher still, until only the ends remained visible, and a curved line along the top. From a distance, it no longer looked like a shelter. It looked like part of the hillside, a mound, a shape the wind would pass over instead of into. The first time they sat inside after sealing it, they brought a candle. No fire, no stove, just the flame. Elias lit it near the doorway, then closed the door. They waited. In the old cabin, it would have moved immediately, bent, shaken, pulled toward some unseen gap. Here, it did not move. The flame stood straight, perfect, unbroken. Marta leaned forward, watching it, as if expecting it to fail. It didn't. Oscar laughed quietly. Ingrid reached out a hand toward the light. Elias said nothing. He only watched the flame and listened. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, through the valley, through every other structure built by men. But not here. Inside the log, there was no sound, no movement, no drift. Just stillness. And for the first time since that night his daughter nearly stopped breathing, Elias felt something return. Not warmth, not yet, but control. What he had built was not finished. The stove was not set. The final ceiling not complete. But the principle held. The air did not move. And if it did not move, it could not carry the cold back in. The storm that would test it was already on its way. The cold did not arrive like a storm. It settled, slow, heavy, as if the air itself had thickened. By the second night, the creek froze solid. By the third, the trees began to crack. Sharp, splitting sounds in the distance, like rifle shots in the dark. Then the wind came, not as a gust, as a constant, a pressure that never lifted. It moved across the ridge, down through the valley, into every gap it could find. In the old cabin, it would have been everywhere, through the walls, across the beds, inside their clothes. But they were not in the cabin anymore. Elias lit the stove inside the log. Not a large fire, just enough. A few pieces of dry pine. The flame caught quickly, soft, controlled. He closed the door, and the world outside vanished. No howl, no draft, no movement. Only the quiet crack of wood in the stove and the slow spread of warmth. The air did not rush toward the fire. It did not rise and pull cold down behind it. It warmed and stayed. Marta sat near the center of the space, hands resting loosely in her lap. Not wrapped, not hidden. "That's all?" she asked. Elias nodded. There was no need for more. By nightfall, the difference was undeniable. The walls no longer felt like something stealing heat. They held it. The curved wood absorbed the warmth, then gave it back slowly. The air remained still, not stagnant, calm. Oscar lay on his back, watching his breath. It didn't move sideways. It rose, then disappeared. Ingrid slept without turning. No restless shifting, no tightening under blankets. Marta reached for the butter on the small wooden table, pressed a finger into it. Soft. She stared at it for a moment, as if she didn't trust it. Then she looked at Elias. He didn't smile. He only listened. Outside, the storm built. By the fourth night, it became something else. Not just cold. Violence. Snow moved sideways in sheets. The wind drove it against the buried log, over it, around it, but not through it. Other cabins were not so quiet. At Stone's place, the fire burned high enough to glow through the cracks, but the warmth never spread. They lived close to the hearth, backs freezing while their faces burned. At Rourke's cabin, the chinking failed in places. Rags stuffed into seams, hands working constantly, trying to stop what could not be stopped. Every time the fire flared, it pulled more cold in behind it. Every flame fed the problem. On the fifth day, the wind reached its peak. Even the trees bent. Even the strongest structures groaned under it. That was when Rourke came. He did not knock at first. He stood outside the mound of earth, trying to understand what he was looking at. No smoke. Not from the chimney. Not from anywhere. In this cold, that meant only one thing. They were freezing inside. He stepped closer, pressed a gloved hand against the curved top, waited for the bite of cold. It didn't come. He frowned, pulled off the glove, pressed his bare hand to the wood. Nothing. Not warm, but not frozen. Impossible. The door opened. Elias stood there, sleeves rolled, face calm. Rourke stared at him, then past him, into the dim interior. "Your fire," he said. "It's gone?" Elias shook his head. "It is enough." Rourke hesitated. The wind pushed against him, pulled at his coat, demanded his attention. Inside, nothing moved. He stepped forward, crossed the threshold, and the world stopped. The sound disappeared first, the constant pressure of the wind gone. Then the cold, not all at once, but enough to feel the difference. He closed the door behind him and stood still. Marta nodded to him once. The children barely looked up. They were not fighting the storm. They were ignoring it. Rourke moved further in, slowly, carefully, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Then he saw it. The candle, set on the table in the center of the room. Its flame did not move, not a flicker, not a tremor. Perfect. Rourke stepped closer, leaning in, watching. He held his breath just to be sure it wasn't him. The flame remained still. Elias reached for another candle. Unlit. He opened the door. Only a crack. The wind forced its way in instantly. Elias lit the wick. For a moment, it burned. Then the wind took it, flattened it sideways, shook it violently, and killed it. Elias closed the door. The silence returned. He set the dead candle beside the living one. The first flame never moved. Rourke stared at them, at the difference, at the truth laid out in front of him. It wasn't the fire. It wasn't the wood. It was the air. He looked around the curved space, at the thick walls, at the sealed edges, at the calm. And something in him shifted. "You didn't build a shelter," he said quietly. "You stopped the wind." Elias shook his head, just once. "No," he said. "I built a place where it cannot live." The storm broke without ceremony. No clear ending. Just a slow easing of something that had pressed too long against the world. The wind dropped first. Not gone, but no longer constant. Then the sky opened, gray lifting into pale light, and Bitter Creek Valley began to see itself again. Snow had buried everything. Fences gone, paths erased, roofs reshaped under weight. Men stepped out of their cabins and stood still, counting. Homes, animals, people. Some did not answer. Some doors did not open. The cold had taken what it always took, but not everything. By midday, tracks began to form in the snow, not toward the woods, not toward the creek, toward the hillside, toward the place that did not look like a house. They came in small groups at first, curious, careful, then more, drawn by something they did not fully understand. They stopped at the edge of the mound, boots sinking into softening snow. Because here, something was wrong. The snow did not hold. Around the buried log, the surface had begun to give way, dark patches showing through, moist, warm. No chimney smoke, no large fire, and yet the ground itself refused to freeze. Thomas Rourke was the first to step forward, not as a skeptic, not any more. He placed his hand against the wood again, this time without hesitation. Still the same, solid, untouched by the cold that ruled everything else. He turned to the others, didn't speak, didn't need to. He opened the door. One by one, they stepped inside. And one by one, they stopped. Not at the warmth, at the quiet. Men who had spent weeks listening to wind inside their own walls stood in a place where it did not exist. The absence struck deeper than the cold ever had. Marta moved slightly to make space. The children watched from their beds, calm, unbothered. The small stove burned low, not struggling, not consuming everything it was fed. Just enough. Someone reached out, pressed a hand against the wall. Then another. Feeling it, trying to understand. How? One of them asked. Elias did not answer immediately. He looked at them, then at the door, then at the seam where wood met wood. Then he said, "It is not the fire. It is where the air cannot go." They stood with that, turning it over, letting it settle. Because they had all felt the opposite for too long. The work began before the snow had fully melted. Not because Elias told them to, because they had seen enough. Trees were chosen differently now, not for height, not for straightness, but for what they could become. Massive trunks once left behind were dragged into clearings, opened, hollowed. Rough at first, crude, but the principle held. Seal it, stop the air, let the warmth stay. Rourke worked beside them, hands that once built walls, now shaping curves, learning something new, unlearning something older. He spoke often, to loggers, to farmers, to anyone who would listen, not about theory, about results. They burn less, he said. They sleep through the night. They are not cold. That was enough. By the next winter, there were 3 more mounds along the ridge, then 5, then more. Not identical, not perfect, but each one quieter than the last, each one holding something the others could not. Elias Varg did not leave his place on the hillside. He did not travel, did not write, did not claim anything. When people came to ask, he showed them what mattered. The seams, the fit, the places where air might try to return, and how to stop it. On certain mornings, when the cold settled deepest again, when the valley held its breath under frost, you could stand at the edge of the trees and see it. Not smoke, not firelight, just a thin line where snow did not quite hold, a place where the ground softened first, a place where the cold had no path. Inside, the air remained still, the flame remained steady, the warmth remained where it was made, and outside, the wind moved on, because there was nothing left for it to take. Warmth stayed because nothing carried it away.